I welcome the Big Book Compendium. My name is Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. So let's start off with questions just in general. What is our problem? In meetings, they talk a lot about the problem, alcohol. And is it our problem though? It's Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the title of the fellowship, so it must be alcohol that's our problem. But the truth is, when people at meetings and stuff talk about the problem, they think they're talking about the problem, but in reality, they're talking about the symptom. And a symptom is an indicator to a disease or disorder or something deeper. And, page 64 tells us when a spiritual malady is overcome, we drown mentally and physically. The spiritual malady is what we'll get into in the next few weeks. And it's the illusion we're separated from God. And so if the problem is separation from God, then the answer must be union with God. And when we believe we're separated from God, we live off of fear and in the misdirected instincts, which we see in the third column of the inventory. This is a great way to describe who we are, what we're like. Is picture like a film projector, like the old school film projector, like you used to have when you were a kid in school. And how does a film projector work? Is inside there's a light bulb. It's within it. The light bulb is within it, and it projects light through the lens to the outside world. And you put a piece of film in front of the light, and it projects to the outside world whatever is on the film. So the film, it represents our mind, driven by things like pride and self-esteem, the misdirected instincts. And so anything on the film is going to project out to the outside world. So if separation from God, if I'm separated from God, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm angry. I'm a failure. I'm bad. I'm scared. I don't like you. We project our defects. So you see, if I am miserable, it is not because the light is bad. It's because the film is bad that I'm projecting, so to speak, the mind. So if the mind is clear, the only image you can project to the outside world is your light within. I am one. I am complete. I am love. I am compassion. I am kind. I am free. What image are you projecting? And that's a great question to ask yourself. So the object of this book is to get rid of self so the light can illuminate you and shine within you to the outside world. Nothing in between you and that light. Then you will shine, that aura we want. And you see, many people in recovery think the purpose of recovery is to be sober or clean, whatever you want to call it. And people say, don't drink or don't use no matter what. And here is the truth. Sobriety or being clean is just a byproduct of recovery. It's a small little spot. It's one of the benefits of it. We come here because we want to get sober. We want to get, past whatever, we can't beat our own power. But we get ourselves in a whole different game because then they're telling us to turn on will life for the care of God. Meaning sobriety is not the goal. Spiritual awareness, oneness with God is the goal. So sobriety is simply a small part of recovery. It's a very small part. Go to page 77. Fourth sentence from the top. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be maximum service to God and the people about us. It just speaks for itself. It's a beautiful sentence. We spiritually fit ourselves by doing the how, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is the same as doing step 10 on a more advanced basis, more daily basis. So we can be maximum service to God in 11 and 12, especially 12. So what happens is when that happens, we know God is, God's within us, and the spiritual malady is overcome. We strengthen mentally and physically. The obsession gets removed and we are recovered. So there's work to be done. We must seek God that has always been within us since they were born. Let's just say, I live about an hour away from San Francisco, and I love maybe once a month, every couple of months, I go out there and sometimes just go out on the beach and look at the ocean. And I can go out there and take a cup and scoop a large cup of that ocean water and bring it home with me. And I can take it home and put it on my windowsill. And what's going to happen is over time, the cup of ocean water starts to slowly It starts to slowly evaporate. And the reason why it's dying is because it's separated from its source, the ocean. And even when one drop is left in that cup, I can drive out there and pour that last little bit of ocean water back into the ocean and regain all the power of its source, all of it. And we are no different. We can be dying away also, but there's a difference is we're not separated from our source, and we've never been separated. Only this illusion that God's out here and what he looks like and all this stuff, because it's within us, we're just blocked. That's why I look at, we can be dying and walking around in a trance, because like the ocean, we too can regain all the power of our source by removing what's blocking us within. And that's why we do that 4 through 9. That's why the steps are not about gaining anything. They're about losing stuff and removing stuff, letting stuff go, so we can be closer to the spirit within. We're on page 45. So, lack of power, that was our dilemma. I have said my dilemma, but I guess it is. But see, I thought lack for the longest time meant, okay, I owe net $20, $25. Here's $5. I'll pay you the rest later. No, lack doesn't mean that. Lack means zero. It means zero. So I don't have any money for you, sorry. But lack of power is what they're saying. There's zero power is our dilemma. And the lack part is, all my life, I thought my dilemma was lack of friends, lack of women, lack of drugs, lack of money, lack of the perfect job. And so I pursued all that stuff outside that I believed I lacked in. It's just an interesting perspective that I grasp upon by doing this process. Let's go back to the book. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how do we find this power? And this we covered last week. Again, where? Deep down within us. It's on page 55. We're not going to go there this week, but we did it last week. And how? 4 through 9, which is really broken down in one nice paragraph on 25, but which we covered last week. So how? 4 through 9, where? Deep down within us. So what is this book really about? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Which will solve your problem. It does not say the main object of this book and enable you to find a power greater than yourself so you can solve your problem. That's the way a lot of people look at it. And if it was, that last part was so you could solve your problem, then we would have a self-help program. It's a simple wording, which will solve your problem, that makes our program the beautiful spiritual program it is, and not a self-help program. And thank God. We're trying to get away from self. It is a spiritual solution program so we can receive the power we lack. And we will see as we move forward in this group, our problem is way more than drinking, it's our thinking. It's back to the book, because that means we've written a book which we believe is spiritual as well as moral. It means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problem, explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened a subject which our man has thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. I love that part, entirely ignored. And I was the same way. I mean, I was 20 years old, and when I had to go to my first AA meeting, and I looked at the third step. Well, first I looked at the first step. I'm like, these people they're screwed. And I looked at the second step, and I just didn't get it. And the third step, I saw God. I didn't see the whole thing, and I just didn't want to be there. And that's the thing, is in recovery, in the rooms, people love to try to sweep God under the rug. And not every area is like that. And don't get me wrong. I mentioned the meetings a lot. I love meetings. I go to meetings all the time. But people love to sweep God under the rug. It's like it's a small part, unimportant. And some people even say, cut out the God talk at meetings. I love this group that you can probably find online called Dog on the Roof, and there's a whole story behind it. But they don't give you a sobriety chip. They give you a dog tag that's a reborn chip. That's a reborn dog tag. And it's a day after you do your fifth step. I think it's really cool. And, but it's not, unfortunately, not everyone is like that. Some people even, I've been at meetings where people say, cut out the God talk, or one of the guys shares, that was a great share, except you talk a lot about God. And it's like, I've heard they say that to me before. So I'm gonna have some fun with this and see how many times God's mentioned in this book. So from the title page, from the title page to 164, God's mentioned 134 times, just the word God, right? Other words referring to God are also mentioned. Creator is mentioned 12 times, Father 1 time, Father Light 1 time, Great Reality once, Higher Power twice, Maker twice, Power greater than himself 4 times, Power greater than myself 6 times, Power greater than ourselves 4 times, Power greater than themselves once, and Power greater than yourself once, Power beyond ourselves once, Power 4 times, Spirit 5 times, Spirit of the universe 4 times, Supreme Being twice, Thee twice, Thy 9 times. And that's a lot of God talk, right? That's 196 times right there, to be exact. But then that's not counting another 50 something times that the words like he, him, or his is mentioned, because they're capitalized. And yet, again, people don't like God talk, and the nucleus of this program is God. No one, nobody desires to talk about it. And why people hate God, why do they hate God talk in recovery? And I think, it's different avenues. It's for some, they hear the word God and they instantly think of religion. And maybe it's the way they were growing up or something. And their mind just, slams shut. And we're already hard-headed individuals. But if you're like me and grew up, having resentment towards God, you hear that in meetings, you're like, eh. And the problem is this: they have not taken action to seek within. This is the contempt prior investigation they talk about in this book. So of course they're not going to like God talk, especially they got resentment. It's just like they want to talk about their spouse who they divorced, who they have a resentment against, or anyone they resent against. But how can you get past resentment without taking action? That's the whole deal right there. In my experience, there's another reason why people freak out and get scared is, when they say find God, is they think they're going to lose their identity. And I've had people say that before, when in fact, this is about discovering our identity, and that's a deepness aspect. Let's see what else the book says. It says, we know how he feels. We have shared our honest doubt and prejudice. I mean, prejudice, preconceived ideas, or old ideas. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him, which some we have tried to impress them during childhood, like me. Perhaps we rejected this particular concession because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. So, for me, I mean, all my thoughts and questions about God were based on a child's conception of God. It was very difficult to get past that conditioning. That God's this old man up in the clouds, and I was told he was punishing, and as I got older, he was mean, and I waited for him after the prayers, and he didn't come. That's the way I looked at it. And I needed to abandon my old ideas of God, because that's where my frustrations were. And the only way to abandon my old ideas of God was just to open my mind to something different. And that's what my sponsor said on 55. He goes, "Is this a different idea for you?" And I said, "Absolutely, God's within." And he goes, "Well, be open-minded to that idea." And I went, "Oh." It was as if I stood on the other side of it's kind of like this. If I stood on the other side of this gate my whole life, and the other side of the gate was God, so I became a believer that on the other side of this gate is God. So I believed in God. And I became even a deeper believer when some people walked out of the gate smiling and different. And by sitting on the other side of the gate, and I wondered why I didn't change, because I never went in. I was still standing still staying at the gate. And it wasn't until I opened the gate and went in, and that I experienced from that's just a good analogy that really makes sense. I mean, since then, all I want to do is tell people, what's really in this AA program, what it's about, how we find God, the location, the method, how and where. And before, I didn't know any location or any method until I did these steps, and it opened that door. It says back to the book, says we were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon God beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inescapable calamity with deep skepticism. We look with askance. Askance? I don't know if I said that right. That means doubt. What that means, doubt. We rolled our eyes at many individuals who claim to be godly. What's interesting about that statement right there is in this book, it says people says, God helped them and we only smiled, right? And then later on, when we were spiritually awake on 68, it says we can laugh at those who think spirituality is a way of weakness. So there's a flip-flop there. That's what happens, How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enhanced by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was a fleeting and soon lost. That's the dream of the agnostic. That's the daydream of the agnostic, the skeptic that doesn't want to confirm or deny God, where they kind of, maybe it's when we're just hanging out in the middle of the desert or something, and we look up there and go, wow. And then all of a sudden we go, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? Sometime we did that. So on this page, I'm going to point out 4 necessities for continuous growth. And I'm going to point them out when we come to them. It says, yes, we agnostics temperament, that's a skeptic, have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found as soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice, that's the first necessity for continued growth, to lay aside prejudice. And notice it says able to, right? Very important. We found as soon as we're able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness, that means being ready to believe in a power greater than ourselves. So that's the second necessity for growth, is being willing to believe in a power greater than ourselves. We commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for us to fully comprehend that power, which is God. Here's the interesting thing. He's telling us to do it, even though we fully can't comprehend it. And for some of us, that's hard to grasp, because we're taught in school, in order to get results, we need to fully define and comprehend what we're studying, what we're doing, before we can move on. Here they're saying that we can get results even if we cannot fully comprehend something, which is God. And how many of us never, sought God because we thought we needed to define and comprehend God. Like, I don't know enough about it. My friend over here knows the Bible up and down, so I need to get there, or whatever it is. Here's a fact: it's impossible to define God. And because there's so many different levels of it, and it's just impossible. We have to stop trying to comprehend God with our mind and start trying to understand God with our heart. That's the best way, because it's your own experience. So now I can talk about God as you understand him. And so real quick, is that God as you understand him came about when we get to how it works. I'm going to break down like how these ideas and the steps came about, like God as you understood him. But it pretty much came from Ebby to Bill, and where Bill was stuck, and he says, choose your own conception of God, which is pretty crazy, considered Ebby was supposed, from this Oxford group, was a Christian group, and that's not a Christian idea. You're not going to walk into a Christian, church and speak to the pastor and say, hey, I'm going to choose my own conception of God. They're going to go, okay, But look what it says here. It says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, it's very limited, was sufficient to overcome the approach and to effect contact with him. As we know, the Big Book uses many different names, for this power, many times. And many times they call this power God. And I think, that the word's used merely for convenience rather than, I would say, a deep religious purpose. I mean, people know the word God. That's why it says every man, one child is a fundamental idea of God. You can't you can fill 2 million people together and they've all heard of God, whether they believe it or not. AA is not a religious program, and you are free to call this power anything that you wish, as long as it's not you. As long as you're not it, you can call it anything you want, as long as it's not you. If your own conception of God as you understand him, it's your own, or as you don't understand him. That's the beauty of it. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God, or you don't understand God. But move on. Don't sit there. Sponsors will keep people stuck on step 2. You got to believe. That happens later on. They're just telling you, be willing to believe, willing to do the steps. Says, as soon as we admitted the possibility of existence of a creative, intelligent spirit of the universe underlying the totality of all things, we begin to be possessed, that means awakened, of a new sense of power and direction. New power, new direction, provided we took certain steps 4 through 9. We found that God does not make too hard turns for those who seek him. That's the third necessity for growth, seeking God. They mentioned, a condition to know God is to seek, which is the action of trying to locate or establish the existence of something. Another word for seek is pursue. Why do we seek God? Why do you seek anything? To obtain it. I never thought about the idea of seeking God. I want him to seek me. I never sought God in my life. Here's a good analogy too, is imagine you're a diamond miner, and inside, that mine is the Cullinan diamond, which is the largest diamond in the world. It's huge. You'd be a multimillionaire if you get it. And if you get this diamond, everything about your life's going to change. And can you get that diamond by standing outside the mine, believing it's in there? You need to grab a pick and seek it and do lots of hard work. And once you find it, you have everything, just like with this process. So now he's going to describe the world of the spirit. And I used to love what Sandy Beach used to say, anyone can enter the world. If the world of the spirit was a room, anyone can enter the world of the spirit, but you got to leave your stuff at the door. You can't bring your stuff in with you. And, the world of the spirit, it's not talking about here, it's talking within us. And this is it's almost like very poetic. To us, the realm of the spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidden to those who earnestly seek. There's that word again, seek. we're all trying, he's trying to tell us something. And you look what he says next. It is open, we believe, to all men, to everybody. So it's telling us we have a spiritual resource beyond our own ordinary personal power that can heal us if we're willing to do the work. This is totally opposite of my perception I had growing up. It was only open to you if you believed the way you were told to believe. And if you didn't believe the way they told me to believe, then I was going to go to hell. That's the way I was conditioned. That's just my experience. Of course, I was crazy. But back to the book. When therefore we speak of God, we mean your own conception of God. This is a perfect starting point. I knew I was hopeless, thanks to 55. I had hope because God might be within me, like they're saying. So this applies too to other spiritual expressions you might find in this book. Do not let any prejudice that's a preconceived ideas you may have against spiritual terms detour you, stop you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. So there's a fourth condition and necessity for continuous growth is honestly asking yourself. And it says at the start, this is all we need to commence growth, to effect our first conscious relations with God as we understood him. Here's a promise. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. I looked for a relationship with God when I was growing up. It was dark, and then I was given this platform to seek God, and it was light. I was awake. The awareness I have now is, from even back then, it's just mind blowing. And it's nothing I can do nothing I can just conjure up my own. I have to follow this recipe that they have and continue to follow this recipe. That was growth. But if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. We used our own conception, however limited it was. So I mentioned those four necessities for growth. I'm going to repeat them what they were right now. We mentioned there. One was to be able to lay aside prejudice. 2, willing to believe in a power greater than ourselves. 3, seeking him, seeking God. 4, honestly asking yourself, or just honesty. So to be able to lay aside prejudice, willing to believe in a power greater than ourselves, seeking God, honesty. This next part of the book says we need to ask ourselves but one short question. So here's where this is where I do step 2 with a guy, my sponsor, or a woman. Do I now believe I'm willing? Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe? It's a little bit different than the wall, and we see at the meetings that in the page 60 of the book, that there is a power greater than myself. So like I said, this is where I take a sponsee, do the second step. I also ask them other questions as well, such as is a belief in God sufficient? Or I quiz them because I want to understand that we covered everything. This is, Bill's going to cover this stuff over and over again. Is a belief in God sufficient to overcome alcoholism? Does your ideas, with God, help you overcome alcoholism? Has human power worked? Are you open-minded to finding God, to finding a power greater than yourself? That's important. Are you willing to take action necessary to find this power? And then I ask them that question: do you believe? Are you willing to believe in the power greater than yourself? And I say you completed step 2. If they answer those to both our satisfactions. But the question, do I now believe I'm willing to believe power greater than myself? This is how Bill started on his journey to God, on his understanding in lasting sobriety. It all began with Bill being willing to believe in a God of his understanding. Let's go back to page 12 and see what happened with Bill. Because so as you're finding that page, to bring up the pace, as Bill he was so mind shut against God, for several reasons. His grandfather was very atheist per se. he would look for flaws in the preacher in town. Like the preacher was also the meat cutter in town, and he would doctor the meat scale and all this stuff. And, you know, the pastor was, and so Bill heard that side of it, and he just, you know, and as Ebby's in front of him, he starts questioning, and that spiritual experience he had in the cathedral when he was 21 years old starts to make sense to him. And then when Ebby says, why don't you choose your own conception of God, this kind of spills over. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. This is the part. Nothing more was required for me to make my beginning. Just beautiful. What a place. What a gift. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. I mean, just beautiful, you know. And the go back to 47. So here's another promise, and this is a beautiful one too. As soon as a man, woman can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him. Emphatically is, you know, it's, you know, a definite, you know, we want you to know this. We emphatically assure him he's on his way. It has been repeatedly proven over and over again, repeatedly proven among us, upon the simple cornerstone, a wonderful spiritual structure can be built. So I'm gonna put up a slide. We'll be doing several of these coming forward. They'll get more and more when we get to like step 4 and stuff. I think everyone can see that. So we've seen this before. If you've been in this book study already, this is the willingness of the foundation. The first layer of the foundation, you know, so, you know, the simple, we have this foundation already laid, and the foundation, you know, of a structure is step 1, which is the willingness. And once you see you're powerless over alcohol, you become willing to change. And a foundation is an essential part of any building. It is the basis of the entire building when it stands on. It has to be solid. If a house doesn't have a solid foundation, it's sliding down the hill, right? Or worse, sinking. But its purpose is to hold it up and hold together the building. The walls, the roof, supports. It's a support for the weight of the building. So the foundation is built to last forever. Is yours? That's the question. And once the foundation is laid and paved in the ground, then what happens is they lay the cornerstone. And the cornerstone of any building, it's the first, it actually goes more like this, like a corner into it. That's why it's a cornerstone. Should probably done it like that more. But it's the first stone laid in at the corner of 2 walls. So it begins to link the foundation and form the first part of a new building, which everything else depends on. It anchors the building together. So this cornerstone is the only one that's going to have like this side thing going in. The rest of them just connect to it, but it's the beginning of a solid structure. And we're building, you know, a spiritual structure as we go through this book, and we'll become more into. This is not the last time we're going to see the structure. We can see and get on to step 3, 6, and 7 a bunch of times in this book until we have a complete structure. I think we'll have a better idea what it is pretty soon. I think many of you do already. But the cornerstone of the structure is step 2, to believe, you know, willing to believe. You know, after you become willing to change, you become, you know, willing to believe. You know, and that's the thing is, I'm going to close this one down. So it says back to the book, that was the great news for us, for we had assumed we could not make spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with a spiritual approach, how frequently did we all say, I wish what that person has, you know, that's the thing. I wish what that person has. And, you know, I always said that. I said that for a long time, you know. I remember doing, when you're growing up Catholic, like I did, you have it, you know, you get baptized and you're like this big, and you go to First Communion, and I did Catholic school, and you do something called confirmation, which is supposed to connect the Holy Spirit within you, and it's supposed to be this moment. And it wasn't the priest's fault, it wasn't my friend's fault that I didn't have an experience like, but those people were walking outside and they were crying, and after they did it, and there was people I noticed changing, I wanted what they had, and I thought this is going to be the moment. But see, I wanted it to happen to me. I didn't realize there was more to it than just you know, this confirmation thing. You know, I wanted to believe and experience what happened to them, but I couldn't. Says, I'm sure it would work if only I could believe as he believes. That's the way I thought. But I cannot accept as surely true that the many articles of faith which are plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could begin at a simple level. Finally, right? Besides the seemingly inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning fear. So those are three things that block you from God: obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. I like to call it stubbornness, easily pissed off, and then the unreasoning prejudice is opinions formed without thought. Sounds like restless, irritable, and discontent, which is restless, irritable, and discontent is mentioned in Doc's opinion. This right here, another example of the dry person. How many times have you met a dry person that's stubborn, they're easily affected, easily emotions affected, and they have lots of opinions formed without thought. Restless, irritable, discontent, that means uneasy of the mind, high anxiety, easily pissed off and not satisfied. That's the dry alcoholic. That's what we're trying to get past. Many of us have been so touchy that even the casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. What's another word for antagonism? Resentment. I mean, I was so angry with not grasping the spirituality, it was easy for me to resign it, to resign away from it and be more like a resentful person towards it. You know, I didn't want to hear anything about it by that time because I couldn't have it. I couldn't have it. So this sort of thinking has to be abandoned. And that means discarded. Walk away from it. Set aside everything you think you know. Stop trying to figure it out. I had, to wipe the table clean, what it meant. I had to wipe it all clean. And what I mean by that is, on one side of my one hand, I still have my child conception of God, who was up in the clouds. And on my right hand, I had this new conception of God that was within, which I had expectations about. And my sponsor told me, don't have the expectation and get rid of, this. And I just wiped the table clean. And 6 and 7, I had a spiritual experience. Just blew my mind. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Here's why. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded. That means without fear. Open-minded means to accept someone's opinion other than your own on spiritual matters, as we tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. I don't know about alcohol being the great persuader in its liquid form. I think it's obsession, but it finally beat us into a state of reasonableness, like it says, in a reasonableness. And sometimes this was a tedious process. We found that no one else will be prejudiced for as long as we were. For 10 years in AA, I was right and you were wrong, closed-minded. I didn't have 10 years. I never got 10 years. I got maybe 3 months here and there, if that. the reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us look at some of them. The practical individual today is a stickler for facts and results, especially today, right? We want results today. Nevertheless, the 20th century ready accepts many theories of all kinds, provided they're firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. So here's about electricity is, I don't care how long you've been an electrician for or whatever, you explain it to me. You know, I mean, no one can really explain electricity. We know that there is a proton, has a positive charge, and we know that there's an electron with a negative charge. But what's the charge? You know, explain that. That's the deep part of it. And still people wonder about that charge. Everybody believes it then without stickler doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it's impossible to explain what we see direct and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. So if the power to my house goes out, my power turns off my house, a reasonable starting point is I'm not going to start ripping the wires out of the wall. I'm going to find the fuse box and see what's wrong. I might call the company on the phone and say, hey, is your power off, or my neighbor? But I'm not going to go tearing the things out the wall. The reasonable starting point is a fuse box, and our reasonable starting point with God can be crazy. We want to know who God is, what he looks like, what color he is, how tall is he, what nationality, what's his name, what does he look like? We go nuts trying to figure this out. A reasonable starting point is we lack power, so the power within us is a simple starting point. So it can't get more simple than that. I mean, back to the book, everyone nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inwardly at all. So, we always looked at ourselves, at our outward appearance, and we say things like, or others, we look at their outward appearance, like that person is happy, that person is strong, that person drives a Ferrari, that person is rich. The reality is inside, that person could be dying in pain. And we judge the outer appearance of others without any awareness of what's going on within that of the person. I mean, did you ever not like, not like, some of us, we base outward appearances, maybe it was the way they talked. I mean, how many times we met somebody and got to know them, and realized they're a good person, and spend some time with them. It's amazing when we spend time with anything, we realize that there's a lot more there. I mean, back to San Francisco is people drive thousands or fly thousands of miles to see San Francisco and to see the ocean. Yet there are people who live in San Francisco who drive by the ocean every day. And all they see is it's dirty and it's stinky and it's just the ocean. They don't even care that they don't even know there's beauty in there. So how do I know there's beauty in the ocean? I put on a wetsuit, grab a tank, grab a diving mask. And I stick my head inside, and I see all the beauty things waiting to be discovered. You have to go inside it. Yet no one sees it because they never look within. They look at the surface. And how do you know the beauty of a person? By looking within. But first we need to look within ourselves. And once we learn to look within ourselves and know ourselves inside and know the power, we see it in everybody else. It's the way it works. I mean, that's the main connection of Alcoholics Anonymous with people, not just alcohol. That's the beauty of it. We need to look within the person and start judging the surface. God's not out here. God is within. The beauty is within us. Inside each person, the light is the same, just like the projector. right? And if the light's not on, it's us to show them that our light is on in the most beautiful way possible, take them to the steps. Back to the book, to illustrate, the prosthetic steel grinder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. How do we know that? You know, you cannot see it, but we know it's there. Why? Because it tells us. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. So, you know, here's the thing. Has anyone really seen an atom, maybe in a microscope, a neuron, or have you seen an electron or molecules? But you have no doubt it's there. They exist because science tells us so. I've never seen a cell. I don't doubt it exists because science tells me so. People all the time say believe in matter that cannot be seen. People don't doubt the stuff. When we ask a person to believe in God or be open-minded to God, you know, something that can't be seen, they say no way. You know, they're dead set against God because it cannot be seen. We cannot see the wind, but we know it's there, right? We know that it has an interesting effect. We see what it does to everything else. We see its effect. Back to the book. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding collective intelligence right here, right there, our own perverse, which is self-will, struck comes from to the surface, and we lavishly set against to convince ourselves it isn't so. So the thing is we say that because our ego is God. So that's what we do. See, also says we read worldly books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Where are the contentions true? It would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and perceived nowhere. So, we choose to believe that our human intelligence, this brain that we have, is the beginning and end of it all, alpha and omega, right? And I mean, there's so many mysteries out there. I mean, the modern view of the universe is 1 billion years ago that somehow rocks, we had rocks and they turned to flesh, and you started thinking. That's the modern view. And I mean, what sounds more intelligent, that a power beyond created something happened? I mean, I don't know what to believe there, but there's a big bang. Well, what turned it on? What flicked the switch? I mean, it's all sorts of things to say. Just swimming your mind around. But molecules, are made up of protons, neutrons, electrons, and you go beyond electrons and you get into particles that don't have any mass at all. They just have something called vibration, energy, and that to science is completely unexplainable. What is a vibration? Could it be God? I'm just saying. No, say that to a person of science and look at their face. I think the more sane view is in the last few thousand years, we come in contact with the power that is living within us and around us in this universe. And we just began to make contact with it. And I think the more each person comes awake, the more it is around us, because that's the way people work. Back to the book. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, that's our real nature, spearheads of God's universe, ever advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of it all. Rather vain, wasn't it? Just lost my place. Oh, there it is. We who travel this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, those preconceived ideas and theories, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties and weaknesses of various faiths may be, Those faith has given purpose and directions to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatsoever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices. We might have observed that many spiritual-minded people of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness, which we should have sought ourselves. Now, when I crawled out from underneath the rock or the bush I was living under, I would cynically dissect the world, of religion, faith, happy people. There's got to be something wrong with them. That's the way I thought, and I knew there was something with them that I wanted, though, and that was my way of getting away from it. But since I couldn't figure it out, I tore them down. And never once did I look in the mirror and thought, I don't have stability. I don't, have happiness. I don't have usefulness. I mean, the question to you is, did you have stability in your life? Were you unstable? Did you have happiness? Do you even know what happiness was? Did you have usefulness? Who were you useful to? Right? We get more deeper on that on the bedevilments. We need to seek stability, happiness, and usefulness within. Happiness is within. Stop chasing the stuff out here. So stability, happiness, and usefulness are 3 examples of spiritual growth. That's 3 examples of spiritual growth. When you start having stability, happiness, and usefulness, you're giving examples of spiritual growth. Page 50, he says, instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes use their shortcomings as a basis for wholesale condemnation. That means attack. We talked of intolerance, but we were intolerant ourselves. All I did was look for flaws in people, like I said, my own miserable existence. I never saw that I did that stuff until 4 and 5. Today, it's totally opposite. I can be around a bunch of destructiveness and find beauty in it. There's beauty in everything, if even ugliness. Look at this. I love this. We miss the reality and the beauty of the forest because we're driven by the ugliness of some of its trees. It's like one bad thing in beauty just makes everything else ugly in our mind. One bad apple spoils the bunch. So I could never see goodness and ugliness. On the flip side, would you know goodness if you didn't have ugliness or didn't see ugliness? Would you know joy without unhappiness, peace without anger? How can you appreciate or even understand open-mindedness? Without a closed mind. It was all part of our journey. And when I looked deep within into my ugliness, I discovered goodness. We never gave the spiritual life a fair hearing. I just never listened. In our personal stories, we find a whole variation in a way which each teller approaches his own approaches and conceives of a power which is greater than himself. That's first, second edition. The stories in the 3rd and 4th edition is about stopping drinking, a little bit different. So the first stories, first edition, are really about finding God. 3rd and 4th edition, they got more into stopping drinking. They switched their style. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make no difference. Experience has taught us that these matters about which our purpose we need to be worried. These are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access and believes in a power greater than themselves. So they gain access to reach something by removing stuff, right? By doing 4 through 9, step 4 and 5, removing stuff, and 6, letting it go. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the human impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record, let's look at the evidence, is what he's saying. Here are thousands of men and women, we're almost done, worldly indeed. They flat out declared that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, step 2, to take a certain attitude towards that power, step 3, and do certain things, 4 through 12, there's been a revolutionary change in the way of their living and thinking. Spiritual awakening is all this course of action, right? Spiritual awakening is this course of action. In the face of complete despair, in the face of total failure of human resources, they found that a new power, peace, and happiness and a sense of direction flowed into them. 4 examples of God consciousness right there. New power, new peace, new happiness, and sense of direction. New power, new peace, new happiness, sense of direction. You notice it says new, something I never seen before or touched. That's all part of the awakening. When it changes your perspective, how you thought something was. And here's how we get that. This happened as soon as we were wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements, 4 through 9. That's the requirements to experience that. Once confused and baffled, this seeming fertility existence, I mean, how about, have you been in the state of, confused and baffled, lost, puzzled, bewildered by, seamless, useless existence? I mean, that's the way I look at that. Once confused and baffled by the seemingly useless existence, they showed the underlying reason why they were making heavily going of life. Look at this. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how change came over them, the psychic change, the spiritual awakening. This is a great way to share to meeting. Leave aside the drink question. Instead, tell why living is so unsatisfactory, and then change. No war story. Today we get 44 minutes of a war story and 1 minute of do the steps, right? Oh yeah, do the steps. Since they never did the steps, there is no way to tell change. Tell why living is so unsatisfactory. What you discover in step 4: instincts, resentment, spiritual malady, insanity, obsession, allergy, restless, irritable, discontent, all the stuff you discovered in the steps. Explain how change came over you. I did the steps. You cannot do without experience the solution. You cannot have without experience 4 through 9. Here's why we share it. When hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of a presence of God today is the most important factor of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. 3 examples of long-term sobriety right there. Leaving aside the drink question, show how change came over them. The presence of God is today the most important factor of our lives. That's deep. All of us in here, I think, can agree that the presence of God is the most important factor of our lives before everything else. Sadly, most people don't put it ahead of everything else. They are confused. They believe that life is chasing what we need and what we want, neglecting the most important thing in our life. So we want to keep chasing things, and I neglect so much in my life. So I'm going to close with a story that really focuses on what we've neglected. Once upon a time, there was a king who had 4 wives. One day, the king got sick and he's on his deathbed. So he's afraid and he doesn't want to go into the next life alone. So he asks his 4th wife, which he loved the most, who he brought diamonds and gold for and expensive clothing. He asked her if she would accompany him to the next life. The 4th wife, replied, "I'm sorry, I can't do that," and walks away. He also loved his 3rd wife. She was the most beautiful, the one he would parade around to the neighboring kingdoms and stuff. So he called his 3rd wife in and asked if she would accompany him to the next life. The 3rd wife replied, "I love you too much. I'm sorry. I'm going to go get remarried." His 2nd wife, who has been there all the times for him, would cook and clean for him, would accompany him. She would accompany him to the afterlife. The 2nd wife replied, "I'm sorry. I can help you here, I can put together, arrange your funeral and make sure your family shows up, but I cannot accompany you to the afterlife. As he sits there and staring at the ceiling, he hears a voice come from the distance and says, and whispers, I'll follow you wherever you want to go, even into the next life. The king looks up and there's his first wife. This was the wife that he took care of the least. He often ignored. He felt embarrassed and says, I'm sorry, I should have taken better care of you and given you more attention when I was alive. The moral of the story is we all have 4 wives. The 4th wife is our body. We like to decorate it with nice jewelry, nice clothing, but in the end, we can't take it to the next life. The 3rd wife represents our possessions. We spend so much time gathering possessions, but in the end, we can't take it to the next life. The 2nd wife is our family and friends who we trust, and they'll always be there for us. We love them, but the furthest they can go with us is our funeral. We can't take them to the next life. The 1st wife represents our spirit within, often neglected in our pursuit for material wealth and pleasure. When we eventually realize how important this 1st wife is, many of us regret how long we've neglected it in our lives and wish we paid more attention to it and listened to it more. So the moral is care for your body, stay well, exercise, cherish your time with your family, enjoy your possessions, but do not forget to care for your biggest treasure, your spirit within. So spend time alone and meditate and pray. Be one with the spirit. Know it. Dedicate your life to a higher purpose, to be the server of others. Get away from yourself. Nourish your spirit as it is the most loyal friend you ever have. And it is the only thing in life that will follow you wherever you go. So next week we'll conclude We Agnostics, and I'll see you next week.